Hey there drone fans, Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's video, I'll pass along a few things to keep in mind if you'd like to fly your drone during these colder winter months. Now I've gotten a lot of questions on the channel lately asking me, is it okay to put a drone up during the winter? And the short answer is, absolutely. There's absolutely no reason you can't fly a drone as the temperature gets a little bit colder, as long as you're aware of some of the behavior that may change on your drone and you're prepared to handle that when you're flying. And for me, one of my favorite times to have a drone up in the air is right after a new snowfall, where the ground is perfectly blanketed in a covering of white and the trees have a white dusting and maybe the sun's starting to set and you've got that wonderful golden hour afternoon sunshine washing across that landscape, making all the colors pop, picking up all the details. Man, there's never a better time to have a drone up at 200 feet and filming that environment. But the challenge is, strange things can happen with your drone. The drone that you've come to love and come to trust, you've been flying it all summer, it's your best friend, your best buddy, and it's responded to every command you've given it, it's flown back home, it's landed right where it took off. It might start to misbehave in the wintertime. And the only analogy I can think of is, if you've got younger kids and they get too much sugar and they're starting to bounce off the walls and they're not behaving like they normally behave, that's kind of what's going to happen to your drone in colder temperatures. And you have to keep in mind, what you're flying here is really probably the most complex piece of technology you own. It's a chemically powered electromechanical device that involves RF signals here and back, multiple electronic devices that have to perfectly work together in a coordinated fashion to handle a drone. So strange things can happen as the temperature gets colder. Now, DJI and other drone manufacturers recommend you don't fly it in weather colder than 32 degrees. I fly all the time in weather below that temperature, and I know if you live anywhere outside of New Jersey, if you live in Alaska or you live in Switzerland, you get temperatures that are really, really cold. But if you stay above 32 degrees, they'll probably fly normally unless you hit some really cold wind up there at height. But if you're below 32 degrees, that's when we get into that, what I call danger zone, where it gets to be a little bit squirrely as far as the behavior of the drones. They'll fly, but things change with the drone when you get below that 32 degrees. And I'll get into that in a minute. But first I want to talk about the basics. So when you go out to fly in the wintertime, you're going to be smart enough before you leave the house to throw on a really big jacket, probably a hat, maybe even a face mask, and some gloves. And you get out there in the field and you start flying. Now, over time you're going to learn that if you use gloves that are too thick or too big, they're going to be bulky and you can't really do what you normally do because this is pretty small, and especially the application that's on the phone or tablet you're using is pretty small. So you want to try and find gloves that are thin enough to keep you warm, but thin enough where you can move your fingers around nicely. You can get a lot of dexterity out of your fingers. And I usually use gloves that are a size or two smaller. I have massive hands. These are tiny gloves, but when I stretch them over these hands, it gives me tremendous dexterity to be able to move my fingers and touch little icons on the screen and be able to do what I need to do. The second thing is, you want to make sure the gloves you're using have the electrical properties where they're actually conductive, so you can tap the screen and make changes on the screen. So many times I've run out with the gloves that I used to shovel the driveway, and they don't have that touch screen in the front. I got to pull a glove off. Now my hands are freezing out there in the cold. So get a good pair of gloves, throw them in your kit so you've got them with you every time you leave the house, but make sure that they're touch sensitive gloves so you can actually make changes on the screen. The other thing you want to keep in mind is when you're out there in the cold, especially if there's snow on the ground, even if there isn't, if the ground's frozen, there's moisture down there, you got to treat that as if you're standing in 6 inches of water no matter where you're going. And what I mean by that is you can't set anything down on the ground because if there's snow, it's going to get wet. And you're going to want to set stuff down on the ground. Your drone case is going to go down on the ground. You may have to put your controller down when you're spinning up your drone. So my recommendation is always have something with you that you can put that stuff down on. Now, I love a landing mat. I use it pretty much every time I fly because I like the fact that I can take off from a dry surface that's clean. I can come back and land there. It's also really helpful if the return to home kicks in because it can find that mat pretty cleanly. I know a lot of people like to hand launch and hand catch, but having a mat with you at least guarantees that you've got a clean place on top of the snow where you can lay down your controller if you need to. You can put the drone down, take off and land on that spot and know it's not going to get damaged. So pretend you're standing in 3 inches of water anytime you go out to fly in the wintertime. And when you think through that, you're like, well, I got to bring something to put my gear down on. A landing mat's a good way to go. Now, it doesn't have to be an official landing mat. If you're driving to a location, maybe take a car mat with you out there in the field, but have something you can lay things down on. All right, so in addition to that, let's talk about the drones a little bit. So protecting the drones is super critical. You're going to have to land and take off. And like I said, the landing mat will help you have a nice clean surface that's dry to land and take off. If you're going to hand launch, which a lot of people like to do, I'm not a big fan of hand launching and hand catching. I think one of the basic functions of a pilot is to be able to take off and land at the same spot. So for me, that's kind of a cool part of the flight. But if you're hand launching and hand catching, there may be occasions where you need to land the drone somewhere else. Maybe the battery really got low really quickly, and having a landing mat or at least a second location identified where you can put it down where it's nice and dry is super important. So before you ever launch the drone, look around to find a place. Maybe there's a road over here that's been paved and it's nice and dry. That would be the place I take off and land from. But if you're going to hand launch, make sure you know where that is so you can come back and land there if you have to land in a hurry. Again, the landing mat will eliminate that. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that the drones themselves, when they're flying, are subject to a lot of different temperatures up in the air than they are when they're on the ground, because you've got all kinds of thermoclines that are going on up in the air that you may have warmer temperatures near the ground or even colder temperatures near the ground and warmer above it or colder above it. So as you're flying, you've got to definitely keep an eye on your metrics inside the drone, the application. And the metric you're looking at more than anything else, most important one, is the battery level. You want to check that battery level, keep your eye pinned on that battery level when you're flying, because cold weather can affect the internals of this incredibly. So for example, I said before that these are chemistry-based electromechanical devices. The chemistry that provides the power plant for this is based on lithium polymer technology. And the challenge with lithium polymer chemistry is that it's very sensitive to cold weather and hot weather. So you don't want to charge these batteries when they're hot or cold. You also don't want to use them typically for too long when they're hot or they're cold. And the challenge is, as it gets colder, the chemistry inside there starts to misbehave in kind of funky ways. So what I find is when I'm flying, I tend to, my rule of thumb is at 50%, I want to be close to me. I don't want to be far out in the field. So I'll fly it down to 50%. Then I want to start trekking back. And if I got multiple targets I want to get video of, I'll shoot the furthest one first, then work my way back closer to me. Because what I've found with lithium polymer batteries in general is that normally there's a linear, what I'll call discharge rate, where you can track it based on time. So if you're flying for 30 minutes and you know you lose 3% a minute, you know you're going to get down pretty quickly, and you can track that based on how long you've been up in the air. The problem is when it's cold, I've seen these batteries go from 50% to 20% like that. There's no linearity to it. So initially at 100%, it may come down to 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, and all of a sudden be at 50, and now it's at 20, and you're panicking because the drone's way away from you. So always try to bring it closer to you to shoot the targets closest to you as last. The other thing to consider is the type of drone you're flying. My experience has been, if it's an internal battery like it is here on the Mavic Mini, this is a Mini 2, I think, yeah, Mini 2, it's a little better because it's protected by the outside of the drone, so it's not going to get cold as quickly. Batteries that mount like this Mavic Air 2S, where it's on the top of the drone, the wind is passing along there, and it's making it colder. The surface temperature is getting colder as it's flying through the wind. So these tend to have a little bit of squirrelier behavior. The new Mavic 3's got an internal battery as well, so that's a cool thing. So just keep that in mind when you're flying. One other circuit that really is impacted by snow, especially if you're flying close to the ground, is the VIO, this visual inertial odometry. I forgot that for a second. But VIO technology basically has infrared sensors on the bottom, and they're going to bounce a signal off the surface below it. So when you get close to the ground, typically under 10 feet or under 15 feet, these guys kick in, and they're watching the ground so it doesn't get too close to the ground. They work really well in most circumstances where you have a differential on the ground where maybe there's grass or there's different patterns down there. The challenge is if you're flying over snow or you're flying over winter in the summertime, they can get confused. And what I mean by confused is they can think they're closer to the ground than they are or further away from the ground than they are, which means the drone could be flying normally, and if you're flying over snow, it could immediately start dropping and actually crash in a field. Now, I've had a couple of circumstances where I got under 15 feet because I was coming in pretty close to the ground, and the drone just decided, okay, I'm going to land, and that was a really scary moment. So in the wintertime, I recommend keeping it above 15 feet or 20 feet above the surface, and you'll be perfectly fine. A couple other things to keep in mind. I talked about mechanical, right? So it's an electromechanical device. The chemistry we talked about, the electro part of it is all the drones you're flying today have a minimum of probably 7 motors in there. You've got 1 motor in each of the props, that's 4 motors. You've got 3 motors in the front gimbal assembly, and you might have a fan inside. So you've got a minimum of 7 motors. Electro devices, or mechanical devices in this case, don't handle cold really well. They tend to get lazy and a little lethargic. So what I mean by that is when you're flying the drone in the wintertime, don't expect it to be snappy in its behaviors. Where in the summertime, when you hit the joysticks, it's going to move in the direction you want it to move pretty quickly, and you get used to that behavior. You get acclimated to that behavior to know how much it's going to turn and how fast it's going to turn. In the wintertime, it's going to be sluggish. So my recommendation is when you first put the drone up in the winter, let it hover at about 5 feet right in front of you, and then use the joysticks a little bit to get comfortable, to get that pattern down of how it's going to behave in that particular temperature on that particular day. And my recommendation when you're flying the drone in the winter, overall recommendation is be conservative. Don't take risks in the winter. Don't try to do things in the winter that you thought you could do in the summertime. Just take your time when you're flying in the winter, but put it up, spin it around a couple of times, take it out 10 feet, bring it back 10 feet, head to either side, elevate and then descend, just to get a feel for how it's going to behave in the wintertime. One other thing I'll mention is that winter weather tends to be a little bit more moist and a little bit dense. Now that's a good thing for flying because it's more efficient to have dense air, but the challenge there is that in addition to getting cold, there could be ice crystals in the air that will hit the drone, which is going to naturally be warmer than the air around it. And those ice crystals can melt and cause issues with the drone down the road. So I would recommend keeping the drone flights short in the wintertime and not spend a lot of time really at high height. So don't fly at 400 feet full of full battery, or you could be in a whole lot of trouble. One other thing I will mention about the batteries, and I said before that the LiPo technology is really kind of sensitive to temperatures, especially at that cold end of the band. You want to try and keep these what I'll call a comfortable temperature or room temperature. Now the way I do that with these drone batteries is I have a fishing vest that I bring with me that's inside my jacket, and I take the batteries and slide those in the pockets, and my body warmth will keep them at a reasonable temperature. I pull them out of the vest, put them in the drone, fly a little bit. When I come back, they come right out of the drone, go back in the vest. And that works pretty well because it keeps them at a moderate temperature, except when they're up in the air flying. Another thing you can use is something like this. Now this is a battery bank that's also a hand warmer. I know you can use those little ones you squeeze or break up and put inside. They'll warm you up. When I was a kid, my dad had one that was based on butane. That always made me wonder, like, I've got a fire burning in my pocket. I know a lot of people like to use those, but I'm not big on those. I'm a big nerd, so I like digital stuff. This one is actually a battery bank. And it also is, it's got heating coils in the top of it, and it's got a low and a high setting. So in that vest, I actually keep this inside the vest, which keeps my body warm, and it keeps the batteries at a nice warm temperature. And you'll find that you'll get better flights and longer flights out of those batteries if you start off with them at least warm. But again, 50% of the flight is about where I'd landed. I wouldn't take it any further. And I think that was pretty much all I had. Oh, one last thing. If you're flying in the wintertime, when you land, make sure you clean off your props, because again, that same moisture that may be collecting on your camera will definitely collect on these prop blades as well. So what I keep is a couple of wet wipes with me that are alcohol based, and I just rub them over the props before I put it away in the case, because a lot of times what's up there in that moisture is gunk. Maybe it's dirt and debris, and that will actually fuse to the props and may cause issues later on with efficiencies. And that's pretty much it. So I guess what I'm getting at is just be aware of your surroundings when you're flying. The cold affects everything: your drone, the controller, your phone. All these electronic devices are impacted by the cold. The chemistry is impacted by the cold, and the mechanical devices are impacted. So when you're flying, keep an eye on the battery levels. When you get to 50%, start coming closer to you. And again, keep those batteries warm before you put them in the drones. And you should have a lot of fun out there. And again, for me, man, every time there's a snowfall, I can't wait to get my boots on and get out of the house and start filming that, because I just love the way it changes the landscape into this almost magical landscape that you can get some amazing footage up there in the wintertime. So my recommendation is be conservative, but have fun. You bought the drone, go outside, fly it, and really enjoy these colder winter months. Summer's going to be here soon, and that white landscape is just something you can't replicate during the summer. So that's pretty much it for today. Thanks again for watching. By the way, if you've got other tips that I've missed, drop those in the comments below. Or if you've got questions about anything I've covered, drop those down there as well. I've got a ton more clips coming. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that icon down there and join the Drone Valley family. I promise you, we've got a lot of cool stuff coming. Anyway, that's it. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy flying.